And welcome to another edition of Gridiron Nation on TSN. As usual, we're here to recap all Canadian action in the NCAA and U Sports. But first, Gord, let's talk about a running back who had inquiries from over 30 Division I schools back in 2020. He ended up choosing Stanford. He showed a lot of athleticism in his freshman year, and then he disappeared football-wise for a couple of years. After spending 4 years in the Bay Area, Brendan Barrow has resurfaced at Rhode Island.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to ever fault a guy for going to Stanford specifically. Obviously, there were other priorities there than just football for him, but in pure football terms, Stanford unfortunately was not a great decision for him. The coaching staff changed over multiple times in his time there. Just when it felt like he might be starting to get some opportunities, the rug was kind of pulled out from underneath him. Of course, they had their head coach Troy Taylor get fired pretty suddenly this offseason. They're under an interim coach now. Barrow was already 1 foot out the door at that point in time. So now he finds himself in a new position. What was nice, though, is that, of course, while he was at Stanford, he was able to be a Stanford student and get his degree. So now he's a grad student, and now he gets to shift his focus back to maybe making a mark on the football field. And it was really nice to see him pop up because he was one of those guys, Jim, we see several every year of these Canadian guys where we're keeping tabs on them. It looks like there might be some promise there, and then all of a sudden, poof, they disappear into the ether that is the transfer portal, and we never hear from some of them again. So it was nice to have that name pop back up and be reminded that, hey, there might be another guy that we can still be talking about. And you talk back to high school, like some services had him as a 4-star recruit. This guy's a legitimate talent. And so it's nice to see him have the opportunity to show it, even if he had to go down a level to do so.
Yeah, 111 yards on the ground for him against New Hampshire in a win, 144 all-purpose. That all-purpose number is important, Gord, because if there's a CFL team out there that's rotating a Canadian at tailback, this is a guy that might be the best option for you in the second or third round when he finally comes up for a draft, because he can contribute on specials as well as carrying the ball out of the backfield.
And he fits the mold of some guys that we've seen go to the CFL after being kind of underutilized in Division One and see pretty quick success. I think of guys like Nick Martin, Perry Mayawa, guys like that now are real factors at the CFL level, even though their last couple years of college weren't particularly productive or high profile. So I think that he potentially fits a mold of a guy like that too. Daniel Adeboye is another guy. And I think one of the things that he did at Stanford, where he actually was able to make a mark before he had to move on, was as a kick returner. So he has cut his teeth on special teams and made a real mark there. And so that is really promising because it's the type of guy that you want a dozen of those guys on your roster in the CFL, because specials are such a big part of the game and still will be in 2027, I might add.
Gord, as for another running back, Antoine Raymond is the offensive leader for the Cornish Trophy in a year led by defense. In a loss at Washington, the Rutgers running back showcases versatility, matching his receiving and rushing production.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about a guy who had to kind of search far and wide for his opportunity. Well, opportunity came knocking for Antoine Raymond, and he seized it and busted through the door himself and has taken the job and absolutely run with it. He was behind a career, I think Rutgers' all-time career rushing yardage record holder, actually Kyle Monungai, for his first year and a bit. But even in the one game that Monungai missed last year, we saw flashes from Raymond, and this year he's just kept that momentum going. And what was nice, as you alluded to with this performance, Jim, is that perfectly balanced, exactly the same yardage. I think it was 89 rushing and receiving in this game, and his touchdown was via the air. And this guy he's everything that you want in a running back at this level. He can score on the ground, he can score in the air, he produces explosive plays, and he seems to have a nose for the end zone. He's not the biggest guy, but he seems to be able to know how to get his way into pay dirt when it's needed. And for a Rutgers team that has had a bit of a tough go this season, he's been a real shining light on that offense that the rest of the offense hasn't really taken the step forward that they had hoped this year. But week in, week out, this reminds me, Jim, you and I were talking before we started recording. This reminds me a lot of Chase Brown's breakout year, in that all of a sudden this guy that, us as the serious niche sicko type ball followers already kind of knew about this guy, and now he's becoming mainstream. and people are starting to really have to take notice. And all of a sudden, we can't help but talk about him on a week-by-week basis because he just keeps giving us reasons to talk.
Well, and in a year where we expected the defensive guys to really rise up to the occasion in the race for the Cornish Trophy, this is a legitimate offensive contender. Hey, let's see what Alex has to do over in Border Ballers. I think he's going to do some basic NCAA math.
Welcome back to Border Ballers, where school comes first and football comes second and classes in session. Let's start with a biology lesson. Daryl Jabome is 6'2", but has an 81-inch wingspan that's 6'9". He used to gator tackle Washington's quarterback, force a fumble, and stopping a would-be touchdown. He looks like an albatross when he spreads his arms. Google that. I know my birds. That's his second forced fumble this year, and he looks to cause more trouble hosting number 8 Oregon on Saturday. On the other side of the ball, Dylan Jeté, comment ça va mon ami? The Lévis, Quebec native hauled in this catch over the weekend when he totaled 82 receiving yards at Jackson State. He also had a touchdown in 3 straight games to start the season, and will have a break this weekend. Let's finish in the SEC with Rohan Jones notching his 4th major of the season in a close loss to Tennessee. That 4 includes his rushing score earlier in the year when he became one of the few tight ends to score through the air and on the ground, while fellow Canadian Jesse Palmer remembered his French in the broadcast booth. He's on the Golden Bachelor. He's great. That's it for Border Ballers. I'll see you on Saturday.
So, Gord, who is your NCAA Player of the Week?
Well, I do want to quickly mention Daryl Jabome. I know Alex talked about him, but for a guy that was leading the Cornish conversation coming into the season, it was nice to see him have a very impactful stat line in that game at Washington against a tough opponent, and he was a beast in that game. But it's got to be Antoine Raymond, and I hate going back to the well on this over and over again. But as I alluded to in the last segment, the way that he made an impact this week was what really jumped off the page for me, as he's been a guy that has been primarily ground heavy early on in the season. But again, like I said, he just keeps finding ways to pop up on the score sheet and make himself a factor. A big, explosive 40-plus yard touchdown reception this week, again against a really good defense. He's showing that it doesn't matter who the opponent is either. It's tough to keep him down, and I just cannot say enough about how much he's blossomed this season.
When we come back, we'll talk about youth sports guys stepping up to the next level.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by Crown Produce. Keep it fresh, Canada.
And welcome back to Football Island, everyone. I'm on an island, but right behind me, if you're looking straight over my shoulder, you'll actually see UBC. And that's a place where 2 guys graduated from and landed in the NFL and are playing key roles with their NFL teams, Gord. Tell everybody about them.
Yeah, Gio Manu was the guy that made the headlines of the 2 of them because he was the draft pick. He was a guy that the Lions reached to select in the 4th round, and I say reached, most draft analysts thought that was a reach. There were people talking about him maybe squeaking into the last round, and they just fell in love with the athletic profile and decided to go get him. And all of a sudden, on a team that is known for offensive line play, one injury to Taylor Decker opens up the door, and all of a sudden Gio's starting in his 2nd year down there and holding his own. And talking about holding his own, funny thing was that Gio was playing left tackle at UBC. On the other side was Theo Benedette. Well, Theo Benedette now starting at left tackle for the Chicago Bears, and he went a slightly different route. He had some buzz around the draft, but he went undrafted, largely due to the fact that by NFL standards, he's kind of undersized at barely 300 pounds. And yet, as I was talking to his former offensive line coach, Bob Beveridge, last week, Bob was talking about how his bend, his natural lower body bend is the best that he's ever coached. And you can see that show up on film as he can move and hold his own and get his center of gravity underneath these NFL pass rushers to keep leverage, despite the fact that he's about 25 pounds smaller than the average guy at his position right now. And he started again this past weekend, continues to hold his own at that spot. What a great story there. And the background of these 2 guys is worth noting because there's a lot of parallels between the 2 of them that run deeper than just UBC. Obviously, they were on the same offensive line, but these guys are also Canadian trained from the beginning, right? They have played all of their ball in Canada. They just went to their local high schools and played ball there. And Jim, as much as we've talked about the trend of Canadians going the prep school route, whether it be football north up here north of the border or going down to the States, it is nice to see reminders that there is still a place, still a value for your local high school football program, and that there isn't just one path to success even now. The old adage of if you're good enough, they'll find you, it still applies. And I can tell you from a guy that's deeply entrenched in the high school football community, like Gio Manu's high school football program has actually now folded. It was never a super prominent program. And Theo Benedette's program, it's the same one that produced Keelan White, who we talked about the last couple of years. So it's an established program, but it's by no means a powerhouse either. So, talent, the cream will rise to the top if it has the God-given ability and the work ethic that goes along with it. I think that describes both of these two gentlemen to a T.
This is a weekend, Gord, where it's a damn shame that U Sports football isn't more accessible to Canadians and promoted to Canadians. So we've got 2 games coming up that will either decide first place or take a large step towards deciding first place in 2 conferences. One of them is Laurier and Western. Both are at 7-0. Last week of the season coming up for them. And the other one is Montreal at Laval, and there will be 20,000 people out there in a 12,000 seat stadium to watch that game. Which one do you want to take on first?
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, like I watched the Hawaii-Utah State game on Saturday night, and all I had to do was download the Mountain West app, and I got to watch it for free. It's amazing that level of football seems to be able to provide their product for free, and this level doesn't, but I digress. I'm going to focus most of my attention on the OUA game, and it's for a couple of reasons. Number one being, this is the Saturday game. So the Quebec Conference loves to host its big high-profile games on Sunday afternoons, while most of the rest of the continent is watching the NFL. So great if you want to go to that game. It's going to be a great game, and I think that Laval is very much in the driver's seat as the host there, with more pressure on Montreal at this point. But I'm going to focus my attention on Laurier and Western, and it feels strange to say this, Jim, but I feel like we maybe haven't talked about Western as much as we probably should have to this point in the season. I think they're the victim of their own success in a lot of ways, right? They are always in this conversation at the top of the conference, but let's not forget that they didn't even win the conference last year. Of course, that was Laurier, who they're facing this week, who went all the way through the Vanier Cup. And it's a really interesting dynamic because you've got a Western team that is in the unusual position of having to be hungry for revenge and having to find a way to overcome a program that got the best of them last fall. On the Laurier side of things, we thought that Taylor Elgersma was maybe a singular talent and the one guy that could take Laurier over the top. Well, it's been astonishing, frankly, how seamless the transition from him to Cal Wither has been this year. I think a lot of people thought that there would at least be a little bit of a transition, kind of like what we've seen from Drew Viotto out on the West Coast, as he got his legs underneath him back in the Canadian game. But it turns out that Michael Faulds truly is the quarterback whisperer around this country right now, because it has been a seamless transition. That offense looks as explosive as ever. And so the narratives that can potentially come out of this game on either side are really, really interesting. For Laurier, they get the best of Western again this year. And it's, wow, this is just now a powerhouse program. If they don't, then it's maybe Taylor Elgersma really was the only guy that could get them over the top. And on the Western side, does the train keep rolling as Greg Marshall's career, gets into its twilight years? Or is it maybe starting to take just this ever so slightest step back as his old protege, Michael Faulds, takes the throne from him?
30 seconds, your U Sports Player of the Week.
U Sports Player of the Week, fitting this Western theme of maybe we should have been talking about them more. This guy we almost definitely should have been. Ethan Dolby goes off for 264 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, including an 85-yard house call against York this past weekend. And yeah, those of you who've been listening for a while will say, oh, well, York, whatever. Here's the thing. That just got him the single season rushing record in school history. This is a school that has produced incredible running backs throughout the ages. It feels like it is a running back factory, and yet this is the guy surpassing Tim Tyndale, a Canadian Football Hall of Famer, who takes the single season rushing yardage record. And of course, as we just alluded to, he does still have one more regular season game to go. So Ethan Dolby, my hat's off to you, as you were far and away the best performer in the country this week.
When we come back, we'll talk to the man who's trying to build a world championship team on the gridiron.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by NFL Canada.
High school football coaches nominate your players for the NFL Canada Way to Play Awards. Each week, winners earn a $3,000 equipment grant for their school program. Show us game footage that highlights safe, proper technique, and impactful play. Winners announced weekly on NFL Live and on NFL Canada's social channels. Learn more at nfl.com/CA Way to Play. And welcome back to Gridiron Nation, everyone. Well, it's a long journey for Team Canada to the Gridiron Nations Championship for more than one reason. And the guy that's been piloting Team Canada to get to this World Nations Championship is Jesse Maddox. He's the GM and head coach of Canada. Jesse, thanks for joining us here.
Hey, my pleasure.
Hey, you went out in April and played an Italian team. I think you swamped them 56-0 in Sardinia. I think you're expecting something very different this time around with your two stops in Europe on your way to maybe a title. You got a stop on November 9th against Italy in Milan, and then a week later on Grey Cup morning against Germany. What are you expecting there?
Yeah, I think we're going to see. a way different team than what we seen the first time with Italy. I think now it's not so much a friendly on their end; they have to play us kind of thing. So I think the competition will go up. I think all their main players will be there, and I think all the excuses will be gone also. So we got that kind of round one, and then round two, the German side of it. Well, I mean, when you look at international football, I think Germany's definitely a pinnacle for what they're doing with the LF, GFL, and international football. They're kind of the European, top two team. And I think that game's going to be very competitive from what I know about that roster.
Well, not only will it be competitive, but I think it'll be quite a spectacle as well. I know for the GFL championship, they're getting up towards the 20,000 mark with sales for that game, for the German national title. The EFL, they had a game in Germany, their final game, and that sold just under about 35,000. I think this game is taking some people by surprise in Germany, the way it's popping up on the calendar, but I suspect that this is something that your players are really focused on. What sort of roster do you have going into this series?
Yeah, I think the first time, when we went to Italy, it was I think it was a good test to see kind of where guys were mentally, physically, but also how they behave, some of the things that aren't just football, but you got to trust these guys. They're bringing a lot of young men overseas, and you got to put your faith in them and that they're the right guys on and off the field. Right. So when we went through that, I think we made some roster changes for various reasons, but I think for the most part, I would say 85-90% of our roster is back outside of maybe 10 new guys, right? So we've kind of adjusted, and I feel like we got a good team. I think we'll be very competitive, and I think it's a good experience in that first go around to kind of dictate where you need to be and kind of your weaknesses and some of the other stuff that go with football, right? So.
It really starts at quarterback for you guys, really two skill positions. You have Michael O'Connor at quarterback, who's coming back. He went with you to Italy, and Jamel Lyles at running back, former BC Lion and Manitoba Bison. Tell me about the impact of those two guys and the rest of your lineup.
Yeah, I mean, those two specifically, they've been there, they've done it. They're two of the highest ranking individuals at their positions, sitting around that are not signed or playing pro football at this point in their time, right? So, I mean, having a guy like O'Connor's played in the States, he's played Division I football, he's played at UBC, he's done it all, right? And then you get a guy like Lyles who's had time, at the U Sports level, but also at the CFL level. I think having guys like that in your room just makes it that much easier, because these guys are professionals on and off the field. They know how to practice, they know how to prepare, they take care of their bodies, and and then on top of it, they're guys that are respected within the team, right? So, getting guys like that, you always want, and you always got to make sure the football matches, kind of everything else that's going on, right? So I think those two are great examples of, just top-notch individuals that I think are staples for what we're doing going forward.
We got about 30 seconds to tell a really big story here. You guys are doing this on your own. It's fundraisers, it's wine tasting, it's golf tournaments. Tell me about the challenge of raising money to put this team into Europe, not just once, but twice.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think that's saying it lightly, right? It takes a village to do what we're doing, and I think for the most part, we got some really good people behind the scenes. The players are putting in the work, and they have to, right? Like I think it's part of this. When you're looking at the amount of money that we're looking at twice now this year to do these type of events. It's all hands on deck, and I feel like for the most part, I don't work anymore. It's just full-time fundraising, sponsorship. It is literally exhausting every angle possible to achieve the goals so that we can get these guys overseas and taken care of.
Jesse, thanks very much for this, and we'll check in with you when we get closer to the GNC.
I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Coming up next, we'll have Gord's pick of the week. Stick around.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by Crown Produce. Keep it fresh, Canada.
There it is, our CFC 50, the top 10 high school programs in the country for this week. By the way, if you're a high school football player born in 2009 to 2011, head on over to CanadaFootballChat.com to register now for the CFC Evaluation Camp Tour. Stop in one of 9 locations across Canada for your chance to play in the 2026 CFC Prospect Game on TSN. Gord, picks of the week.
So we'll start down south, and it is an ACC matchup between a kind of overlooked Louisville squad so far this season. And this is a team that was in the ACC championship game last year. Jeff Brom and his brother Brian as well have done a fantastic job coming back to their alma mater and running that program, and have really vaulted it into championship conversation in the ACC year after year. And of course, from our Canadian perspective, Rene Conga and Wesley Bailey have been big factors on that Louisville defensive line as they've gotten out to a fairly quiet 4-1 start, their only loss being in overtime to Virginia. And they get the test of their year as they get to travel down to South Beach and take on the number 2 ranked undefeated Miami Hurricanes. We've talked enough about Akeem Messidor on the show. I probably don't need to belabor that point. Look out for him. They are, I think, a 13.5-point favorite I saw. If I were a gambling man, which I am not anymore, I would probably take the underdog in this. I just don't see that spread really being that big between these two teams. I think Louisville's being slept on a little bit, but it should be a really interesting matchup. And as we noted, the ACC is right there for the taking. It looks like it might be Miami and then everybody else right now. Louisville has a chance to make a statement that it's going to be a little bit more dramatic than that going down the stretch.
And quickly, your U Sports game, I think we might have heard a little bit about it earlier in the show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I need to tee it up much more. You do want to keep one eye on that Laval-Montreal game on Sunday, but the game of the week has to be the Laurier-Western showdown. And again, as I noted, Laurier got over this hump last year in getting through Western in the playoffs. Now, this isn't the playoffs, but that home field advantage looms large. Both these teams historically play really well at home, and so managing to go into London and give themselves the opportunity to not have to go back to London at any point in time can potentially be really big for Laurier here. So there's a lot on the line for them, and just about as much for a Western program that is probably foaming at the mouth to get back at their conference rivals.
For everyone here on The Nation, this is Jim Mullin saying, let's get out to the game.